So this first case we're going to talk about this morning is the Lucy versus Zemer case. So one of the principles that we talked about on Tuesday was that contract disputes, when they get to court, are going to be viewed through the lens of the objective theory of contracts. We're going to look at what was said, what was done, the circumstances surrounding the negotiations or the transaction, and then we're going to assign to people's words and actions and writings the meaning that a reasonable person in the circumstances would apply to. So this is how the court looked at this Lucy versus Zemer case. What year is this case from? Who knows? The 50s, that's right, and it's from Virginia. So looking around, probably just Miss Marshall and I might be the only people who were familiar with the filling station. You know what a filling station is? Yeah, that's the old-timey gas station. That's what we used to, or not we. It used to be called the filling station. So Mr. Zemer owned a motor court, filling station. Like I'm thinking of the old Howard Johnson. You know, you'd pull in, you'd get gas, you'd eat, you'd spend the night, that kind of thing. All right, so let's see here. I'm going to split the room from Wilmot and Massey over this way, and from Germany that way. All right, so you guys on this side are going to be, y'all are attorneys for Mr. Lucy. Everybody over here is attorneys for Mr. Zemer. So before we start arguing, what are the basic facts? Who can just kind of lay out for me what was going on here? Who are these people and why are they beefing? Go ahead, Wart.
Lucy offered to buy Zemer's 471.6-acre land.
Okay.
He offered them $50,000 while they were both, I believe, at a bar.
Zemer's restaurant. Yep.
And they were having a couple of drinks. Zemer decided that, or I guess said that he would accept that offer and sell his land for $50,000. And he and probably his wife, right?
I like how you added jokingly in there because I said you're a Zemer's lawyer, right? Okay, I got that. Yep. He and his wife.
Played to sign a contract agreement.
All right. So Lucy's attorneys, your position is what? What happened? What happened that night? Zemer, you and Zemer entered into a valid contract for the sale of the Ferguson farm. Right. Zemer, what is your argument overall about that night? Not specifics yet.
Two buddies having drinks. Make jokes all the time, especially like that.
Two buddies having drinks, make jokes all the time, right? So there was no contract, no valid enforceable contract. That's the issue before the court. Was there a contract and is it enforceable? So before we get into the facts, I want to skip a second because the court lays out in their opinion the facts first, and then it lays out the law and applies the facts to the law. But let's look at how the court is going to view this through the law prism. So on page, if you're following along, the very bottom of page 5, the court starts their discussion of the applicable law by saying, in the field of contracts, as generally elsewhere, we must look to the outward expression of a person as manifesting his intention rather than to his secret or unexpressed intention. The court's telling us what we already know, that this is how they're going to view these kind of disputes. So let's, for a second, list. Well, no, it's not the list. I'm going to start with Mr. Lucy's attorneys. Give me a fact that was good for you and your client. Andon. Okay. Okay. So you're raising the fact of the duration of the negotiations and the discussion. Okay. All right. That's a great fact for you. Zemer, what do you guys say about any response to that? Well, any response to the argument that it took 30 or 40 minutes for all this to play out?
You look around at people that are under the influence trying to talk and learn words going in and out of subjects, switching off and on tangents lots of times.
Good, Warwick. Drunk people can go on and on about something. So their judgment could be influenced. So there's good arguments on both sides, but I love what I want y'all to see what we're doing now is trying to go back and forth on it. So what Warwick said was good. So what? Drunk people talk. I was about to name somebody in my family as an example, but I think I won't. All right, your turn, Zemer. What's a good fact for you?
In Zemer's testimony, like he was high as a Georgia pine.
High as a Georgia pine, and how would that affect the transaction work?
I don't think anybody gets high as a Georgia pine. Right decision. I would assume that they're definitely just playing around the house. In that case, if I was Lucy, I don't know how I can take my buddy serious.
All right. Lucy's attorneys, what's your response to that? Zemer says he was so high, didn't know what he was doing.
Zemer's wife also signed an agreement.
She did. Zemer's wife did all.
Was she intoxicated during all this?
There is no evidence, I don't believe, that she was drinking.
So I think his sober wife was there to tell the people make the joke, and I would have stopped there at the point that the other dude signed the contract.
So Mr. Cooks raises the point that his wife being not drunk, or there not being any evidence that she was drunk. Henry's about to die to respond to that, so go ahead. Okay. Oh, she did? Oh, I didn't realize. I stand corrected. Maybe Mrs. Zemer was also tipsy. All right. Who's ready for another good fact over here for Mr. Lucy? There's a bunch of them.
Lucy wasn't his wife. Lucy's the last name of the other dude.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I might have got y'all confused.
No.
Yeah, no, Lucy is the name of the one man. Zemer's name of the other.
So Lucy was drinking, but that's not the wife. So the wife wasn't taking any drinks. That was she was high.
Oh, did I misunderstand what you were telling me, Mr. Henry? No, Lucy is not the wife. Lucy is the other party. Lucy's a man. So there's somebody who was there who didn't think it was serious, right? All right, Mr. Lucy's attorneys, they say that Mrs. Zemer, her testimony is that she thought they were joking. Yes. Why'd she sign it? Because her husband told her to. Well, my question then would be, if I was the judge on that point, can you show me any evidence that Mrs. Zemer thought it was a joke? I'm sorry. Can you show me any objective things, not from her head, but anything she did or said that would have indicated that she thought it was a joke?
I mean, the only thing I've seen is that her husband described it, don't worry about it.
All right.
And she even said no originally.
She did say no originally. Very good. So there was some. Okay. She was. Miss Marshall's digging in. I like it. All right. Would you do it? Unless it's for the right amount. All right, come on. There are good facts on each side. Throw out another one for me.
So she had to be convinced it was a joke or decided. Did anyone convince Lucy it was a joke before he decided, or was he under the impression it was still serious?
He was, well, we don't know. I mean, that's the, Lucy's position is, I was serious the whole time. I wasn't joking. I was never joking. Zemer's position is, of course we were joking. You knew we were joking. We were talking.
Yeah, if this is why he was joking before he decided, I think it's reasonable to assume he didn't know they were joking.
That it wasn't.
Communicated beforehand.
So Lucy has been trying to get them to sign this for a while. This wasn't the first offer, so he got him wrong.
Good point.
He him to sign it under the
All right, so I'm going to repeat that to make sure all my people out in online land are hearing. Ms. Marshall says, Lucy should have known it was a joke because he had asked many times before and gotten shot down by Zemer. And this time he chose to bring alcohol into the equation to try to get him. Because who brought the alcohol in? Lucy did. What do you say to that? Zemer been drinking all afternoon. By his own admission, he was already drinking. All right, what are some other good facts for either side?
I believe later that night, he said, whenever he tried to close the contract, he said, heck no, that is beer and liquor talking. I'm not going to sell you the farm. I've told you too many times before.
All right, so that's not subjectively in his head. That's something he said to Lucy. What was Lucy's response to that? Too late. Too late, sucker. Right? What happened the next day? This is at Christmas season, by the way, y'all remember. So there was a party in town that the Lucy or Mr. Lucy and the Zemers were at, and this was the topic of discussion. Okay. And did Zemer do anything at the party that would continue to indicate that he thought it was a joke? He told Lucy, I'm gonna let you out of that deal. I'm not gonna hold you to it. That'd be a bad deal for you. What about the price? Who does the price favor? What's the analysis on that? Sales price of $50,000.
I think it would be a good price.
Good price. Bought it for $11,000 a few years ago, and and Mr. Zemer said at the Christmas party, if we went through with that, if I held you to that, you'd be the one stuck. That's a good price, I think.
But there was, it did say there was some negotiation. It wasn't like, oh, I need 50,000, like that now. It started at some point.
Okay. So again, bringing back into it that there were negotiations involved. more evidence of a legitimate business transaction than a joke.
Lucy also had cash on. He was ready to go ahead and
Well, I think they were disputing about whether or not he had the cash on hand because I think Zemer said, I was just trying to call his bluff because I knew he didn't have it. And Lucy's like, oh, I'll get it. I think that's how it went down. All right, what about, say that again, Andy? It shows some commitment. So I think that goes more to, supports your point about the negotiations and all that. What about what the alleged contract was written on? How would y'all argue that?
I wouldn't say it was very official.
Do we really sell $50,000 400-acre farms on a cocktail napkin? What do you say about that, Lucy's attorneys? Writing is writing. That's all. If it meets all the elements, who cares what it's written on? Yep. All right. Okay. What about the fact that this all went down in a restaurant on a weekend evening during the holiday season? Anything to argue there? Zemer, what do y'all argue? What'd you say? The best time to make a deal. Everybody's happy. Zemer's argument is, what serious real estate transactions don't go down like this. A reasonable person would not have assumed that we were negotiating to do something as important as selling a farm. Of course it supports the idea that it was a joke. Look at the setting. What do you guys say to that, Lucy? Bernard?
Once Lucy showed that he was committed, Zemer could have told her, listen, I am all serious, but he still kind of continued.
That's a great point. Why didn't Zemer say at any point, we're just joking?
Because it seemed like he genuinely wanted the $50,000.
He did seem pretty excited about the $50,000, didn't he? What about who did the writing? How do y'all argue that? Yeah, so the earnest money. All right, yeah, so let's come back to that. That's a good point. Devin, you're saying that
He wrote it himself. I think if he had seen the $50,000,
he wrote it. Zemer wrote it.
his wife appreciated it.
Right? If you're joking, why'd you write it? What else did he do? Did Zemer do after he wrote it? Okay. He also did something else. He wrote it and then made corrections. Right. Zemer, you guys have something on your side against that. What'd Zemer say? He did. But what about the actual writing itself? Y'all remember that? Zemer asked to see it at trial, looked at it and said what? I don't even recognize my own writing. Oh, I misspelled the name of the farm. Of course we're not serious. Of course I didn't have the capacity. I can't even spell. The court said what? What was the court's response to that? You can't tell by looking at it that he misspelled it. It's really hard to tell. He says he did, but it's really hard to tell. All right, that's also that's good both ways. What else? Let's see. See if I've forgotten some. What other arguments? There are more arguments. Oh, Miss Marshall did say they sign it all, and Lucy attempts to give Zemer $5 as a down payment. And Zemer did what? Rejected it because why? Because we were joking, right? Again, we were joking. We were joking. What about the fact, Mr. Woods, that the contract included some language about the title being satisfactory to your client?
We have to show that like, yeah, like we can agree on how we agreed and like, it was a fair offer. It wasn't like, oh, here's 50,000.
Right. They thought about some other terms, or they were thinking about some more, yep, some more technical issues.
50,000, but we get a small shed in front.
Okay. What do you say to that, work?
Yeah, those are, there were some other words and they're being used, but in defense of Zemer, I don't know if Lucy ever had these drinks.
Are we getting personal on Lucy's attorney now?
I'm saying all like that. I'm just saying. Sometimes I'm with you're with the guy.
All right. Y'all did a good job on that. Go ahead. No, go ahead. You want to breathalyze Zemer's attorney? Wait.
And then listen, and then someone's like, hey, shoot this 3-pointer, I'll give you 1,000 cash if you make it, and then it happens, you're like, oh.
So maybe they should have told the jury, we're going to let everybody drink the same amount that these guys drank, and then we'll see how drunk y'all feel, right? I don't think you can do that. But I am curious to know what you're taking off your attorney hat now, what you think either way. Do you think from an objective standpoint, you're a juror, you're not the attorney anymore, you're a juror. What do you say, Ms. Marshall? Oh, that's a good argument. We sell things of high value in simple terms all the time. Okay. Ms. Rosser, what do you say? You're on the jury. Lucy or Zemer? Who are you ruling for? Nathan.
I was willing to defend Zemer, but like the fact that like there was, I think, straight up wrote the contract as a joke, but then refused to at any point say, "Oh, this is just a joke we're joking." To like,
All right. So that's 2 Lucy, 1 Zemer. What do you got, Sage? Lucy too? All right. What's the most important piece of evidence for you then in making that decision? Okay. All right. Henry, what do you say? 3-1. Who? Zemer. All right. What's the most important? All right. All right. So you put a lot of weight on the fact that there was a neutral witness who said that she could tell they were both drunk. All right. So that's a vote for Zemer. 3-2. Steve, what you got? You're convinced it was a joke? If you look at the whole setting, you would conclude that they weren't serious? All right. So then the question is, if we're looking at it objectively, what he said was he thinks Lucy was serious, but Zemer wasn't. Was Lucy justified by the objective acts and words and deeds of Zemer in believing that he knew what he was doing? Was it reasonable for Lucy to assume or think or believe that Zemer knew what he was doing? Maybe. So what are we now? 3-3? All right. Work, what you got?
I think Lucy was right.
All right.
Aside of the fact, the evidence of the contract itself, I think the fact that we were bought the farm for 11,000, and now he's agreeing to sell it for 50,000. That's like a really good price for him. I think that's evidence. He was serious.
All right. So 4 for Lucy, 3 for Zemer. What do you think, Elias? Okay. So there's enough evidence that they might not have been in there at their best. All right, 4-4. Woods?
Yes, they were slightly different, but it's the fact that like, it came out on the writing, as well as a neutral party, somewhat neutral party, the wife, signed her name, who was not drunk, shows that Lucy's right.
All right, 5 Lucy, 4 Zemer. Theo? Why?
I think when you're drunk, you make some dumb, not drunk, I mean, you drink. Drinking is stupid. And sometimes jokes run a little extreme. And yes, they never specified that, hey, we're joking. Like, Lucy never thought to ask, hey, are we kidding here? Because I feel like Lucy kind of just saw it as like, I'm just waiting for them to like, start putting words on a napkin, and then I'm gonna strike and like, hold my ground and feel stubborn and not let up at all. And I just think that, I mean, hey, we could have a couple lightweights over here. Tipsy to them might be pretty heavy. You never know.
That's true. That's a good point when it comes to capacity. What 20 beers would do to one person is a lot different than what it would do to somebody else. So, I lost count. Where does that leave us? 5-5? 5-5. That was a very good argument, Mr. Thiel. Why were you so quiet earlier? What you got, Bernard?
Even though they were both intoxicated, we always have an issue about it. The wife might have had a couple of drinks by that time, but she was still like a youthful body. Still signed it, even though her husband was joking or serious.
All right.
I think both parties could have been like, hey, are we joking or not? But it was coming more from Zena's side because Lucy already showed that he was serious in proving that he'll get the money.
Okay. So that's we're +1 for Lucy. Laura, what do you think? Because. Okay. All right. So we're +2 on Lucy. What do you say, Moultrie? You're assuming the responsibility that you might do something. Where was that earlier? Come on. You guys are making great legal arguments now here that we're at the end. Where was that earlier? So that's +3, Lucy. Ms. Robinson, what do you say? So you're Zemer. Okay. +2, Lucy. Devin?
I think the fact that the conversation went on so long, it wasn't a joke. If he genuinely thought he could get the 50,000, I think he would have taken it.
Okay. So you're convinced that.
He went and talked to his wife, the neutral party. They made a whole agreement with that and fixed the contract with Dave. If he had brought up the money, I think he would.
So you're saying if Lucy had had the money right there, Zemer wouldn't have been joking. He would have taken that money. All right, so we're back to +3. Miracle.
when you play tag with somebody and everybody like, you like, oh, I'm not playing.
I do remember that. That's such a kid thing, right? Oh, I wasn't trying. Yeah, yeah. We weren't really racing. Interesting. All right, but you got to vote one way or the other. All right, so we're +2. What do you got?
I think Lucy, because even if he was like drunk and joking, I feel like contractual capacity refers to like your ability to understand the contract. It's like a pretty simple, like I'm going to give you money and you're going to give me your farm. Black and white.
Ah.
It's hard to like misinterpret that.
How drunk do you have to be to not understand I'm going to sell you my land, you're going to give me 50,000? That's pretty simple. Interesting point. All right, Mason, you missed our discussion, but you get a vote. You're on Lucy's side? Well, your half of the class was Zemer's lawyers. People change. All right, y'all did a good job on that. Who won the case? Lucy won. The court did fine for Lucy. Court did fine for Lucy. But you can see, I mean, these things are not always black and white. I mean, even in our class, we're going to have some very valid points to disagree on. So, good job. All right, let's talk about the Wright versus Newman case for a second. And this is a Georgia case. I'd like to say that it's relatively recent, but I do acknowledge that 1996 was a while ago. And it involves the doctrine of promissory estoppel. So if you remember from Tuesday that we said consideration is one of the essential elements of a contract. If you don't have consideration, you can't have a contract. But there are some situations, it's rare, but there are some situations where a court might find that a person who made a promise is going to have to be bound, held, obligated to that promise, even though there is not a contract in place. That's called promissory estoppel. You had to have a few elements for that. I'm going to review these while we're here. Where I left off. I think my notes got out of order. All right, you got to have a clear and definite promise. The promisor has to expect that the promisee is going to rely on it. The reliance has to be reasonable. The promisee has to actually, in fact, rely on it to their detriment. And then the last element would be that justice can only be served by enforcement of the promise. So in this case, if we walk through that, and you notice in this case that the justices sharply disagreed with each other on whether or not promissory estoppel applies here. But let's start from the standpoint that it does. Do we have a clear and definite promise? Well, if we did, what would it be? Well, let's back up for a second. Who are Wright and Newman? Who can tell me who our parties are? Okay, I think we got it backwards. Kim Newman is the mother, and Bruce Wright is a man, right? Ms. Newman had a child that's not biologically Mr. Wright's, but they were together sometime around, I guess, the time the child was born, right? And Mr. Wright recognized the child as his and participated in raising it and so on and so forth. Okay. Years later, Ms. Newman sues Mr. Wright for child support. So I probably should have started this way. Did they have a contract for child support?
The court is saying because he's
Okay. The court mentions that. Did they at the time, did they ever have a contract that mentioned child support? No. They never did anything up front that said, I will pay child support if you let me, I guess, be this child's dad. So one of the elements that would be lacking would be consideration, would be one of the arguments. So let's move on to the court is making a leap here about what Mr. Wright's promise is. We don't see anywhere where he actually said the words, I will support this child for life. I will pay child support. I will assume all the duties and obligations of a father. But the court's saying his actions assumed that role. Okay. The biggest dispute, I would say, between what the justices who found that there is promissory estoppel and Wright should pay child support and the ones who disagree with that was whether or not Mrs. Newman relied on this promise to her detriment. Did y'all catch that? So what is the argument on either side of that? There's an argument that she did rely on it, and there's an argument that she didn't. The argument that she did involves the fact that did she ever go after the real father for child support? No. How many years? 10 years passed, I think. This man wasn't in the child's life. That would be evidence that she relied on it. I didn't go after somebody else. You stepped up. You were the father for a while. Justice Benham disagrees with that pretty strongly. What's the argument against the fact that she relied on it to her detriment? Boom. She cut him off after 2 years. And then 8 years passed. He wasn't paying during the 8 years after she cut him off. So what's her detriment? She didn't get child support from him either. She get it from either one of them. That's one of his arguments. There's no evidence that she couldn't have gone after the real dad. You can go after the real dad anytime. You can't get back child support, but you can go ahead and get it started going forward. So what was her detriment? The justices disagreed about that pretty strongly. That she gave up that or just didn't do it, right? Because she I guess that's the argument. She gave up her opportunity to do that. But Justice Benham says she did. Did she really give up her opportunity to do that? So then, after Justice Benham disagrees with the majority's opinion in that regard, Justice Sears comes in at the end and she points her finger right at Justice Benham and says, I just want to respond to that. And she comes back at him pretty strongly by emphasizing the last element of this, which is that justice, the only way to serve justice is by making right assume that obligation. Keep that quote unquote promise. Because if we don't, she says, what happens if we don't make right pay? She does say that. She says, if Wright is allowed to renege on his obligation, Newman will not receive any support to assist in the cost of raising her son, despite having been promised the receipt of such by Wright. Furthermore, an even greater injustice will be inflicted upon the boy himself. The child who has been told by any adult, regardless of the existence of a biological relationship, that he will always be able to depend upon the adult for parenting and sustenance will suffer a great deal when that commitment is broken. And when a child suffers, society at large suffers as well. I think she might have a really good point there, but if I'm on the other side, I'm quibbling. Well, I'm not quibbling. I have major issues with if Wright is now allowed to renege on his obligation. What obligation? That would be my argument. That the child, or despite having been promised the receipt of such by Wright, when did he promise that? Show me that. I'm not convinced he promised that he would support the child for life. When a child has been told by an adult, when did Mr. Wright tell the child that he was going to be in his life and support him forever? Nathan.
You know what? Someone needs to pay child support, even though you're not the father, you're like,
And you know what?
that's their entire argument.
Newman won this case. Kim Newman, she won this case from the Supreme Court of Georgia. I think legally it's a stretch. I'm not saying, I get Justice Sears' point about father supporting children and the message it sends to children. I get that. I don't see legally how promissory estoppel could be applied to this case. I don't see how Newman relied on the promise to her detriment. That's what's missing for me from a legal standpoint. I also think it's just a little problematic that she cut him off and then 8 years go by. Anyway, I am curious to know, I won't poll you individually, but what is your reaction or thoughts to this case? Nathan gave his. So you're persuaded by him signing the birth certificate. So you believe that Newman was justified in saying, if you sign the birth certificate, what else? What did you think was going to come along with that? Right? Okay. Thoughts? I would tell Justice Sears, since when are we telling a 10-year-old what's going on with the legal case surrounding his support? I mean, what? But I think that yeah. The passage of time also stands out to me. Yeah. Yeah. Hair.
I'm not trying to say, okay, yeah, you got 8 years, suck it up the rest. But it's like, if you wanted to have,
well, I don't quibble with, I'm fine with all the moral arguments about supporting children and obligations that you assume and all that. That doesn't bother me. I have a hard time seeing the legal basis for applying promissory estoppel. Hair. Well, he shouldn't have. I don't think it's a crime. Well,
Wasn't he under the understanding that he was the biological father of the birth certificate?
yeah, I think they said he knew he wasn't. I think he knew he wasn't. I think everybody knew he wasn't. But don't miss this point. The court is not saying they had a contract. If they had a contract, then the court could have just said, I find that you either do or don't. The court's saying you don't have a contract, but promissory estoppel is going to apply here, and we're going to make him fulfill his quote unquote promise. I love a lot of children. I don't want to pay for them. I'm kidding. Just kidding. That's it. I think it's an interesting case. I mean, I'm standing in front of you telling you that I think it's a hard case from a legal standpoint, but the Supreme Court of Georgia and the people that are a million times smarter than me found for Ms. Newman. So, well, you can't ever get in Georgia. You can't get back child support, but you can get it going forward. There was nothing that stopped Ms. Newman the day this decision came down from taking the real father to court. Sadie. You can, if you owed it, but you can't establish the obligation retroactively. So if somebody is found by a court order to owe child support and then they don't pay it, they owe what they didn't pay. Right. That's right. Does that make sense? But yeah, all day long, if you are obligated to pay it and you don't, you can absolutely get dinged for that. All right. I'm going to read out a couple of scenarios because we've got a couple more minutes. Johnny offers to buy Keith's goat for $50. Keith says that he would sell the goat for $55. Do they have a contract? Why? Right. All right. That is right. That first offer became void when so now there's a counter offer on the table. They never came to an agreement. Good. Johnny's friend Randall owns a cattle ranch. One day, Johnny asks Randall if he ever thought about selling it, to which Randall replied, as a matter of fact, I was planning on listing it sometime next year for $1 million. Next week, Johnny sends Randy a check for $1 million and a note that says, I accept your offer to sell the ranch. Do they have a contract? No. Why? Right. We don't have offer and acceptance because the statement of future intent is not an offer. Good. Johnny offers to buy Keith's Corvette for $50,000. Keith just rolls his eyes. Johnny later informs Keith that they have a contract because Keith's silence was acceptance. Yes or no? No, Mr. Henry, why not? That's right. Would any reasonable person understand that an eye roll is a yes? No. Johnny has a horse that's worth $25,000. When money gets tight, he offers to sell it to George for $18,000. George accepts, but when it comes time for George to pick up the horse, Johnny decides that $18,000 is not a fair price, and he backs out of the agreement. Can George enforce that as a contract? What about the argument that the consideration isn't sufficient? It was sufficient to him at the time. That's right. The courts. Yep. They're not going to get into the adequacy of consideration. Very good.
Yeah, I was about to say.
How would you show in court that what? Oh. You'd have to have a witness or something to show that. Otherwise, it would just, yeah. I guess, yeah, that's a good question. We're assuming that there's a witness that can say that's exactly what they said. Or that there's an email or something in writing. Yeah. Text, something. All right. Anybody have any questions? So next week, we're going to do the rest of contracts. Tuesday, I'll lecture, and then next Thursday, we'll discuss again. Y'all have a good weekend. Is Lucy versus Zemer? I probably would vote for Lucy. I mean, you can't, after the fact, say you were joking and that you were, I mean, I'd be Lucy. It's a good deal. I mean, yeah. 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 Oh, where'd Devin go? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I think he's with the bathroom.
Okay.